The conference hall aboard the neutral station Zenith Prime was massive and cold, filled with beings from across the galaxy who looked down at the human delegation with barely hidden contempt. Admiral Jacob Harris stood straight at the platform assigned to humanity, his gray uniform crisp despite 3 months of endless meetings that led nowhere. Beside him stood Lauren Mitchell, the diplomatic officer whose patience had worn thinner with each passing day of insults disguised as negotiations. Commander Ryan Blake stood at the back of their small group, his hand resting near his communicator, ready to relay orders to the human fleet waiting. Just outside the neutral zone, the Galactic Council had been talking at humanity for 90 days straight. Never with them, always at them, like parents scolding children who did not know better. High Arbiter Zelenthor stood at the center of the chamber, his body made of living crystal that reflected light in sharp angles, making him look both beautiful and dangerous at the same time. Around him sat representatives from dozens of alien species, each one convinced of their own superiority simply because they had reached the stars. Before humanity did, the Catholic ambassador was speaking again, his voice dripping with condescension that made Jacob's jaw tighten. The insect-like creature gestured with multiple arms as he laid out demands that would strip humanity of most of their territory and freedom. He spoke as if he was doing them a favor, as if humanity should be grateful for the opportunity to exist under Council supervision. Lauren's knuckles had gone white where she gripped the edge of their platform, but her face remained professionally blank. 3 months of this, Jacob thought. 3 months of listening to beings who had never set foot on Earth tell humans how to live, where to expand, what technology they could develop. 3 months of watching his people bite their tongues while aliens dismissed human achievements as lucky accidents or primitive stumbling. 3 months of increasingly insulting terms presented as generous offers. Zelnathor raised one crystalline hand and the chamber fell silent. His voice resonated through the space like wind chimes in a storm. The Council had made its decision, he announced. Humanity would accept limited travel corridors through space, surrender 70% of all the worlds they had discovered and settled, and submit to technological oversight by Council inspectors who would determine what humans were ready to possess. These terms were generous, he said. Considering how young and inexperienced humanity is in the greater galaxy, the other aliens nodded and made sounds of agreement in their various languages. The Vrexian delegate coiled her serpent body tighter, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The massive Dramati representative rumbled approval deep in his chest. They all seemed to think this matter was settled, that humanity had no choice but to agree because the alternative was facing the galaxy alone. Jacob looked at Lauren and saw his own thoughts reflected in her dark eyes. They had known this moment was coming, had discussed it privately over meals and in quiet corners of their quarters. They had hoped it would not come to this, but they had prepared for it anyway because hoping for the best while planning for the worst was what humans did. Ryan caught Jacob's glance and gave the smallest nod, his blue eyes hard and ready. Jacob stepped forward to the speaking position and felt the weight of every alien gaze upon him. He spoke clearly and calmly, with the tone of a man who had made peace with a difficult decision. He addressed Zelnthor with respect, but not submission, thanking the Council for their time over these 3 months. Then he pointed out what should have been obvious to everyone in the chamber. Humanity had come to Zenith Prime in good faith, seeking partnership and mutual understanding between equals. For 90 days they had listened to demands that treated them not as fellow sapient beings, but as subjects to be managed. They had watched as Council members dismissed human culture, belittled human achievements, and assumed human compliance with whatever terms the Council chose to impose. The hall erupted immediately into chaos. Aliens rose from their seats, making sounds of outrage and disbelief that anyone would dare question the Council's authority. Some clicked their mandibles in anger, while others harmonized threatening tones. The smaller species looked shocked, while the larger ones leaned forward aggressively. Through it all, Zelnthor remained still and silent, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Jacob raised his hand to silence his own delegation before they could respond to the aliens' outrage. His voice cut through the noise with just 2 words. "We're done." The chamber fell into shocked silence. The Vrexian delegate uncoiled slightly, her forked tongue tasting the air in confusion. She hissed that they could not simply leave, that the council's terms were not up for debate. If humanity rejected them, they rejected peace itself. Her tone suggested this was a threat that should send the humans. Scrambling back into compliance, Lauren Mitchell stepped forward then, her voice carrying an authority that surprised some of the aliens who had dismissed her as decoration beside the admiral. She looked directly at the Vrexian and corrected her with words sharp as knives. "No," she said. "The council rejected peace when they decided to demand submission instead of offering friendship." There was a difference between the two, and if the council could not see that difference, then they were not as wise as they believed themselves to be. Ryan. Blake activated his communicator. Speaking clearly enough for everyone in the chamber to hear every word, he addressed all human vessels in the fleet, using his command codes to make sure there was no confusion about his orders. "Execute withdrawal protocol," he said. "We're coming home." The aliens began speaking over each other in a dozen languages, some demanding the humans reconsider, while others made threats about what would happen if humanity chose this path. High Arbiter Zelnthor's voice boomed over them all, silencing the chamber through sheer force of volume and authority. He addressed Jacob directly, calling this a grave error in judgment. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, he said. Without the Council's protection and guidance, humanity would not survive long enough to regret this decision. Jacob had already turned toward the exit, his delegation falling into step behind him with military precision. But at Zelnthor's words, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. His expression was not angry or afraid. Instead, he smiled slightly, the way a teacher might smile at a student who had completely missed the point of an important lesson. Then he spoke words that would echo through the Galactic Council chambers for months to come. "I suppose you'll finally get to see what humanity does best then," he said. "We survive." The airlock sealed behind the human delegation with a hiss of pressurizing atmosphere. On the other side, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence, suddenly uncertain about what they had just done. They had expected the humans to fold, to accept whatever terms were offered because young species always did. Instead, the humans had walked away with their heads high and their dignity intact, choosing an uncertain future alone over a certain future on their knees in the docking bay. Jacob and his team boarded their shuttle quickly and efficiently. Nobody spoke during the flight back to the human fleet. There was nothing that needed saying yet. They had just changed the course of human history, and they all knew it. When they reached the flagship, the crew stood at attention, but their faces showed worry beneath the discipline. They had heard the transmission and knew what walking away from the Council meant. Ryan Blake took command of the fleet immediately, ordering all ships to form up for the jump back to human space. Lauren began composing the message they would send ahead to Earth, informing the government that negotiations had failed and humanity was now on its own. Jacob stood on the bridge and watched through the view screen as Zenith Prime grew smaller behind them. He thought about Zelnethor's words about survival and found them ironic. The Council had no idea what human history looked like, what humanity had endured and overcome long before they ever reached the stars. They did not know about ice ages survived with stone tools, or plagues that killed half the population, or wars that threatened to destroy everything but somehow led to stronger unity. They did not understand that humans had been proving everyone wrong about their chances of survival since they first climbed down from trees and decided to walk upright across hostile plains. The stars streaked past as the fleet engaged there, faster than light drives. Behind them was a council that had made the mistake of confusing patience for weakness. Ahead was home and the monumental task of proving that humanity could thrive without the galaxy's permission. Jacob had no doubt which direction held the better future. 3 weeks had passed since humanity walked away from Zenith Prime, and the Galactic Council was beginning to understand that they had miscalculated badly. The emergency session had been called in the middle of the night cycle, which almost never happened in the 1,000-year history of the Council. High Arbiter Zelnethor stood before the gathered representatives looking less confident than usual, his crystalline body reflecting the worried faces of those around him. Ambassador Belcora from the avian species spoke first. Her feathers ruffled in a way that showed deep agitation. She reported that humanity had closed every single border crossing into their space. Every colony, every outpost, every trade station had gone completely dark. Nothing was allowed in, and nothing was coming out. Ships that approached human territory were warned away by automated defense platforms that had appeared seemingly overnight. The humans had built a wall around themselves and locked the door. From the inside, Zelane's single quotes Tar studied the holographic display that showed human-controlled space, glowing red on the star maps. In just 3 weeks, the territory had been transformed into something resembling a fortress. Defensive satellites orbited every human world. Minefields had been deployed along likely approach vectors, and patrol routes covered every possible entry point. The sheer amount of work required to accomplish this in such a short time seemed impossible. Yet there it was displayed in glowing lines and dots across the projection. The Catholic ambassador stood on multiple legs and declared this was irrational behavior that proved humans were not ready for galactic civilization. They needed trade to survive, he insisted. They needed resources from other systems and knowledge from older species. They were barely 2 centuries into space exploration and could not possibly sustain complete isolation. This would end within months when their economy collapsed, and they came crawling back, begging for the Council's terms. General Bothrak of the Hierarchy Military Command stepped forward then, his massive armored body creating deep shadows across the chamber floor. He was old for his species and had spent decades studying military history from across the galaxy. His voice was grave as he told the Council that they had made a strategic miscalculation of historic proportions. Several representatives turned to stare at him because Vothrak was not known for exaggeration or drama. Zelnathor commanded him to explain, and the general pulled up data files on human history that his analysts had been reviewing. He spoke about a human concept they called necessity, being the mother of invention. Their entire evolutionary path was one long story of adversity forcing advancement faster than should have been possible. When faced with extinction events, they adapted instead of dying. When faced with resource scarcity, they innovated instead of collapsing. When told something was impossible, they achieved it anyway, often seemingly out of spite for being told they could not. The chamber fell quiet as Vothrak continued his analysis. The humans had been patient and reasonable during negotiations because they hoped for peaceful cooperation. The Council had interpreted that patience as weakness and desperation. But human history showed that when they stopped being patient, when they decided cooperation was impossible, they became something entirely different. They became a species that would do whatever was necessary to prove wrong anyone who doubted them. Vothrak brought up the critical point that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. The council had just told humanity they could not survive without council guidance and protection. If human history was any indication, they would now dedicate every single resource they possessed to proving the council wrong. They would turn their isolation into a challenge, and their wounded pride into motivation. The general's final words hung in the air like a death sentence. "We have not contained them," he said. "We have focused them." Meanwhile on Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains in an emergency command center that had been excavated during humanity's last major war, Admiral Jacob Harris stood before a gathering that represented the best and brightest minds humanity could assemble on short notice. Scientists stood beside military officers, engineers talked with civilian leaders, and everyone's face was illuminated by the glow from countless displays showing resource charts, technological blueprints, and strategic projections. Jacob's voice carried through the massive underground space as he addressed them all. The Council had wanted to treat humanity like ignorant children who needed supervision, he said. Now humanity would show them what humans were really capable of when properly motivated. He called on Dr. Helen Carter, a physicist whose silver-streaked hair and bright eyes made her look like someone's kind grandmother rather than one of the most brilliant scientific minds alive. Helen stepped forward and announced that her team had cracked the theoretical framework that had been considered impossible by conventional physics. The prototype was working in test conditions. If humanity committed full resources to the project, they could have the first operational units ready within 6 months. She pulled up technical displays that showed energy readings and mathematical proofs that made the other scientists in the room lean forward with excitement. President Alan Foster appeared on the main screen via secure communication link from the surface, where he was coordinating the civilian government response. He asked the question everyone needed answered. What would this cost in terms of resources, and could humanity actually afford it right now? When they had just cut themselves off from galactic trade, Helen admitted the resource cost would be substantial, perhaps even painful in the short term. But it was sustainable if everyone committed to the goal. More importantly, once the technology was operational, it would change everything about humanity's position in the galaxy. The Council thought they understood human technology and capabilities. Helen's smile was sharp as she said they were completely wrong about that, Commander. Ryan Blake pulled up star charts showing the space surrounding human territory. He pointed out 17 star systems that Council maps marked as uninhabitable or worthless. Human surveys told a different story. These systems were rich in rare elements and perfect for colonization. They just required adaptation and creative solutions to environmental challenges. Ryan's tone was dry as he noted that adaptation was something humans excelled at. As General Vothrak had apparently figured out, Lauren Mitchell had been promoted to Director of External Intelligence after the failed negotiations. She shared information that her networks had gathered from inside Council space. The economic disruption was already starting to show. Humanity had been a larger trading partner than Council leadership wanted to admit publicly. Several member species were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why the Council had taken such a hard line with humans. Some were even suggesting privately that reaching out to humanity independently might be worth considering. Jacob allowed himself a small smile at that news. The Council was beginning to fracture, beginning to doubt. Good, he said. Let them wonder what humanity was doing behind closed borders. Let them worry about what would happen next. Humanity had spent 3 months being patient and reasonable and diplomatic. Now the Council would get to see what happened when humans stopped asking for permission and started taking action. The meeting continued for hours as different groups presented their plans and proposals. Agricultural specialists explained how they could increase food production to support rapid population growth in new colonies. Industrial engineers showed designs for automated factories that could be deployed on uninhabited worlds. Military planners laid out defensive strategies that would keep human space secure, while exploration ships pushed outward into unclaimed territory. Through it all ran a common theme that everyone in the command center understood. Without needing to say it aloud, humanity had been dismissed and insulted and told they were not good enough to stand as equals. That rejection had lit a fire in the human spirit that would not be easily extinguished. Every person working on these projects was driven by the need to prove the Council wrong. To show the galaxy that humanity deserved respect, not because they asked for it, but because they demanded it through achievement. Dr. Helen Carter stayed late after most others had left, reviewing calculations with her core team. Her assistant asked if she really believed they could accomplish everything they had promised in just 6 months. Helen looked up from her work, and her expression was determined. She said that humans had split the atom, landed on their moon, and mapped their own genetic code all within a single century. They had gone from horse-drawn carriages to space stations in less than 200 years. 6 months to revolutionize their technology when their independence depended on it. That was not impossible, she said. That was just Tuesday for humanity. In orbit above Earth, the shipyards that normally produced commercial vessels and exploration ships had been converted to military production and new colony construction. Welding torches sparked in the darkness as thousands of workers labored around the clock. The mood was not grim, but determined. Everyone understood what was at stake. Humanity had chosen freedom over security, independence over submission. Now they had to prove that choice was the right one. Back in Council space, Zelnthor sat alone in his private chambers reviewing reports that kept getting worse. The humans were not collapsing as predicted. Intelligence suggested they were mobilizing their entire civilization towards some goal that remained unclear. The worst part was the uncertainty. What were humans capable of when they stopped holding back, when they stopped trying to impress the council and started trying to survive without it? Zelnthor was beginning to fear they would find out the answer, sooner than anyone expected. 6 months had passed since humanity walked away from the peace talks, and the Galactic Council was now facing a reality that seemed to violate every principle they understood about civilization development. High Arbiter Zelnthor sat in the council chamber, reviewing intelligence reports that had been verified 3 separate times, because nobody wanted to believe the first assessment. His crystalline form had lost some of its usual brilliance and now appeared, dull in the chamber's lighting, intelligence. Director Crixfall stood before the assembly, presenting findings that seemed impossible yet were undeniably true. Humanity had colonized all 17 of the disputed systems that Council maps marked as uninhabitable. They had established complete self-sufficiency in rare element production that previously required trade with multiple Council species. Most concerning of all, they had deployed a technology that Council scientists could not identify, could not understand, and most definitely could not counter. The holographic display shifted to show grainy footage captured by long-range sensors along the border of human space. Human vessels moved through the void in ways that defied conventional physics. They appeared in one location, vanished completely from all detection systems, then reappeared light-years away moments later. Normal, faster-than-light travel left traces that could be tracked. Whatever the humans were doing left nothing at all. Dr. Severin, the Council's chief scientist and one of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy, stood from his seat with his tentacles trembling in what appeared to be academic excitement mixed with professional terror. He announced that the humans had somehow weaponized quantum displacement theory. That technology was purely theoretical, he insisted. The mathematical framework alone should have required centuries to develop properly, and the practical applications were considered impossible with current understanding of physics. General Vothrak spoke up then, with the tone of someone who was tired of being proven right about unwelcome predictions. He reminded the Council that he had warned them 6 months ago. Humans did not respect theoretical limitations the way other species did. They saw impossibility as a challenge rather than a barrier. When told something could not be done, they became obsessed with doing it anyway, just to prove the doubters wrong. Far across the galaxy along the human frontier, Lieutenant Kate Morgan stood on the bridge of the HMS Newton, watching space itself ripple around her ship like water disturbed by a stone. The Newton was humanity's first quantum drive-equipped vessel, and Kate still felt a sense of awe every time the drives activated. Around her, the bridge crew worked with efficient professionalism, but she could see the pride in their faces as they operated. Technology that made them invisible to the most advanced sensors the galaxy possessed. The navigation officer reported that the quantum drive was holding stable and performing even better than the test projections suggested. They were achieving speeds 40% faster than conventional faster-than-light travel, and the energy efficiency was remarkable. More importantly, they were completely invisible to every standard detection grid that other species used. The Council could not see them, could not track them, and could not predict where they would appear next. Kate's communications officer looked up from his station and announced an incoming message from Fleet Command. Admiral Jacob Harris wanted a full demonstration of the Newton's capabilities conducted where the Council would notice. They were ordered to patrol through the Catholic trade corridor and make absolutely certain they were seen by merchant vessels and military patrols. The message included specific instructions on how visible they should be and how impressive they should appear. Kate smiled at the orders and asked her communications officer whether they were supposed to just be seen or if they were supposed to show off. The officer grinned and read Admiral Harris's exact words. Remind them what human innovation looks like when properly motivated. Kate nodded and ordered the helm to plot a course through the busiest shipping lane in Catholic space. They would give the Council something to worry about. Back on Earth, in the command center that had become the heart of human government during the isolation period, President Alan Foster met with his cabinet to review the progress reports that kept exceeding their most optimistic projections. The mood in the room was cautiously optimistic, but everyone understood they could not afford to become complacent. Secretary of Development Karen Hughes presented the industrial output numbers that showed a 300% increase since isolation began. Scientific advancement was accelerating exponentially as research teams competed to solve the challenges that independence required. Population morale was higher than it had been in decades because everyone felt they were part of something historic and important. Humanity had turned isolation into an advantage instead of a weakness. Secretary of Welfare Marcus Flynn raised the concern that had been bothering him for weeks. The numbers were impressive, and the achievements were remarkable. But at what cost were they building this new civilization? Humanity had essentially become a fortress culture, with no contact with alien species, no cultural exchange, no diplomatic relations beyond their own colonies. Was this sustainable in the long term, or were they building a society that would become rigid and isolated? Admiral Jacob Harris leaned forward across the conference table, and his expression was serious. He explained that this was not about revenge or wounded pride. This was about establishing respect on a foundation that could not be easily dismissed. The Council had treated humanity like primitive children because humans came to them peaceful and open. Now the Council was learning that human cooperation had to be earned through respect rather than demanded through intimidation. Lauren Mitchell brought up new intelligence displays, showing cracks forming in the Council's unity. The Vrexian Commerce Guild had petitioned 3 separate times to resume trade with humanity, because their economy was suffering without access to human goods and markets. The Silvery Consortium was openly criticizing the Council's hardline stance in their own government chambers. Even some Catholic factions were beginning to question whether their leadership had made the right decision. Commander? Ryan Blake stated simply what everyone in the room was thinking. The Council members were scared. 6 months ago, they had looked at humanity and seen upstart children who needed guidance. Now they were watching humans develop technologies the Council did not understand, expand at rates the Council could not match, and thrive in isolation that should have destroyed them. Humanity had become the unknown variable in a galaxy that prided itself on predictable order. President Foster asked if it was time to extend an offer to negotiate again, this time on human terms. Jacob shook his head firmly and explained that the timing was not right yet. The Council needed to understand completely and thoroughly what they had thrown away. When they dismissed humanity's offer of friendship, they needed to come to humanity with genuine respect. Not out of fear, but out of recognition that humans deserve to be treated as equals. Only then would the foundation be strong enough to build lasting peace. Karen Hughes asked what would happen if the Council never came around, if they remained stubborn and proud despite everything. Jacob's expression hardened, and his voice was cold as he answered. Then they would learn to fear humanity instead of respect them. And that would be the Council's mistake to carry, not humanity's burden to fix. The meeting continued as various department heads presented their progress on different initiatives. The colony expansion was ahead of schedule with new settlements, being established at a rate that seemed reckless but was actually carefully calculated. The defense grid around human space was now layered deep enough that any attack would be suicidal for whoever attempted it. The quantum drive production was ramping up with 27 ships now, operational and more coming online every week. Dr. Helen Carter joined the meeting via remote connection from her laboratory where her team was working on the next generation of quantum technology. She reported that they had already identified 3 major improvements to the drive system that would make it even more efficient. More exciting was the breakthrough in quantum communication that would allow instantaneous contact across any distance. If the test succeeded, humanity would have communication technology that surpassed anything the Council possessed. Kate Morgan's patrol through Catholic space had gone exactly as planned. The Newton had appeared on long-range sensors just long enough for the Catholic military to scramble ships to investigate, and vanished completely before those ships arrived. It reappeared on the other side of their territory, transmitted a polite greeting on standard frequencies, then disappeared again. The message was clear without being threatening. Humanity could go wherever they wanted, and the Council could not stop them or even track them effectively. Reports from Council space indicated that the demonstration had caused exactly the reaction Jacob hoped for. Emergency meetings were being called, military advisors were scrambling to develop countermeasures, and political leaders were arguing about how to respond. Some wanted to escalate tensions, while others counseled negotiation. The council was fracturing under the pressure of their own miscalculation. In his private chambers, High Arbiter Zelnthor reviewed the reports with a growing sense that history was turning against the council in ways that might be irreversible. The humans had done in 6 months what established species needed centuries to accomplish. They had not just survived isolation, but thrived in it. They had not just maintained their technology, but advanced it beyond council understanding. Most troubling of all, they had done it while maintaining the moral high ground, because everyone knew the council had rejected them first. Zelthur pulled up the recording of Jacob Harris's final words before leaving Zenith Prime 6 months ago. "We survive," the human admiral had said. At the time, it sounded like bravado or desperate hope. Now it sounded like a promise that had been kept. Humanity had survived, and in surviving had become something the council could no longer ignore or dismiss. The question now was whether the council would adapt to this new reality, or cling to old assumptions until it was too late. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had stretched into its 3rd day, which was something that had never happened in the institution's 1,000-year history. The chamber that usually echoed with measured diplomatic speeches and carefully calculated debates now crackled with barely controlled panic. High Arbiter Zelnthur stood at the center, looking diminished. Somehow, despite his crystalline form catching the light as it always did, his voice had lost the certainty that usually commanded instant obedience from the assembled representatives. Zelane single quotes, Tar announced the latest intelligence report with obvious reluctance. 7 more systems had been claimed by humanity in the last month alone. These were systems that council surveys had marked as uninhabitable or too costly to terraform. Humanity had moved in any way and transformed them into thriving colonies, using techniques that seemed to ignore conventional limitations. Council projections had suggested such expansion would require decades, if not centuries, of careful development. Humanity was doing it in months. Ambassador Felcora spread her wings in the agitated pattern that her species used to express extreme distress. She reported that the situation was far worse than simple expansion. Humanity was now offering protection and partnership to independent colonies and minor civilizations, who felt marginalized by the Council's rigid hierarchy. 3 smaller species had already accepted human protection rather than Council membership. They were building an alternative power structure that threatened to undermine everything the Council represented. Trade Minister Plaxton added his voice to the growing list of problems. The economic impact was becoming critical across multiple sectors. The Vrexian Commerce Guild was reporting losses of 30% since human trade had ceased. The Sylvari were no longer just complaining privately, but were now openly threatening to break ranks and negotiate directly with Earth. The unified front that the Council had maintained for centuries was crumbling under the weight of their own miscalculation. General Vothrak stepped forward with tactical projections that cast shadows across the chamber as the holographic displays shifted and moved. His report was grim and professional. Militarily, the Council could no longer guarantee superiority over humanity. The quantum displacement technology had rendered their entire defensive doctrine obsolete overnight. They could not track ships, they could not detect, and they could not defend against threats they could not predict. Every military advantage the Council possessed had been neutralized by human innovation. Ambassador Terval of the Dramati Empire rose to his feet, which took effort given his massive bulk. His species were known as hawks, who favored military solutions to diplomatic problems. That made his next words all the more shocking to the assembly. They needed to negotiate with humanity, he said. They needed to extend new terms that were actually fair this time. The alternative was watching their influence collapse while humanity built a new order without them. Zelnthur's response carried both frustration and fear. Negotiating now meant doing so from a position of weakness. The humans would demand everything. recognition as an equal power, territorial concessions, access to council markets, and technology. The council would effectively be surrendering their authority over galactic affairs. To a species that had barely reached the stars 2 centuries ago, Vothrak cut through the denial with brutal honesty. They had surrendered their authority the moment they underestimated humanity. Now they were simply facing the price for their arrogance. The general's words hung in the air like an execution sentence that nobody wanted to acknowledge, but everyone knew was true. Halfway across the galaxy aboard the HMS Unity, Commander Ryan Blake.
Revi intelligence reports from human spy networks that had been carefully positioned throughout Council space.
The networks were small but effective, consisting mostly of automated monitoring systems and a few deep-cover operatives, who had been in place since before the failed negotiations. Ryan read through the reports with growing satisfaction. He opened a communication channel, too. Admiral Jacob Harris, who appeared as a holographic projection. Ryan reported that the Council was fracturing exactly as predicted. 3 separate Council members had sent covert communications, trying to feel out the possibility of private negotiations with humanity. The messages were carefully worded to seem like innocent inquiries, but the desperation underneath was obvious. Jacob asked how they were responding to these overtures, and Ryan smiled. Standard protocol was being followed. Each inquiry received a polite response thanking them for their interest and informing them that all diplomatic discussions must come through official Council channels with humanity recognized as a sovereign equal. They were not interested in backdoor deals or playing favorites with individual species. The Council would negotiate as a unified body or not at all. Jacob nodded his approval. No divide-and-conquer tactics that could be used against humanity later. The Council had to approach them properly, with full recognition of human sovereignty. He asked about the status of the quantum drive fleet, and Ryan reported that they now had 27 ships operational, with more coming online every week. The retrofit program for commercial vessels was ahead of schedule. Within 3 months, their entire merchant fleet would be quantum-capable, which meant humanity would have the fastest and most efficient trade network in known space. Jacob told Ryan to make sure the Council knew about the commercial fleet upgrade. Let them calculate how irrelevant their traditional trade routes were becoming when human ships could move cargo faster, cheaper, and more securely than any Council alternative. Every piece of information that reached Council space should remind them of what they had rejected. On the border of human space, Lieutenant Kate Morgan led her squadron on another very public patrol along the edge of Council territory. Her orders were specific, and she followed them precisely. Be visible, be impressive, and above all, be peaceful. Show strength without aggression. Demonstrate capability without threats. Let the Council see what humanity had become without making them feel cornered or desperate. Kate's sensor officer announced contact with a Catholic patrol group, holding position exactly at the territorial boundary. 6 vessels maintaining a respectful distance but clearly observing the human ships with intense interest. Kate ordered communication channels opened and made sure her tone was friendly rather than confrontational. The Catholic commander appeared on the view screen with his features carefully controlled to show professional neutrality. He acknowledged the human vessels and noted that they were operating near Council space. His tone suggested he was fishing for information about human intentions. Kate replied with deliberate pleasantness. They were conducting routine patrols inside human territory, as was their right. She asked how things were on the Council's side of the border, making the question sound like casual conversation between neighbors. The Catholic commander admitted things were stable, then paused before adding that his analysts were very curious about the energy signatures coming from human vessels. Their propulsion system was unlike anything in Council databases. Kate's smile widened as she confirmed that the quantum drive was indeed innovative. She mentioned casually that humanity had developed the entire system in just 6 months. Amazing what could be accomplished when people were properly motivated. The Catholic commander understood the implication immediately. His expression shifted slightly to show respect mixed with concern. He acknowledged that humanity had been quite resourceful. Kate caught the unspoken meaning behind his diplomatic language. The council was starting to realize the magnitude of their error. After the transmission ended, Kate's communications officer looked up with barely suppressed amusement. He noted that the entire conversation would be in a report on Zelnthor's desk within hours. Kate agreed, but pointed out that it was not just conversation, but psychological warfare. Every word had been chosen to remind the council what humanity was capable of. Let them wonder what else humans had developed. Let them imagine what another 6 months of human innovation would produce. Back in the council chamber, the debate had reached a critical point. High Arbiter Zelnthor presented 3 options to the assembly. They could continue current policy and hope humanity eventually needed council assistance. They could escalate to military pressure and force humanity back to negotiations. Or they could negotiate from their current weakened position and accept whatever terms the humans demanded. Ambassador Felcora noted that the first option had clearly failed. Humanity had proven beyond doubt that why did not need the council? They had built a self-sufficient civilization that was advancing faster than established powers. Hope was not a strategy. General Vothrak addressed the second option with brutal clarity. War with humanity would be devastating for both sides, but the council could no longer guarantee victory. Human technological advancement was accelerating while council development remained static. Any prolonged conflict would favor humanity as they continued to innovate while the council relied on established systems. Ambassador Terval stood again, and his massive form dominated the chamber. He stated plainly that negotiation was the only rational choice. They needed to accept what they should have offered 9 months ago. Genuine partnership, equal standing, mutual respect. They needed to acknowledge their mistake and build something better from the ruins of their arrogance. The Catholic ambassador protested weakly. The council did not make mistakes, he insisted. To admit error would undermine their authority across the entire galaxy. Member species would question. Council wisdom and the whole structure of galactic governance could collapse. Terval's roar silenced the chamber and made several smaller species flinch. He told them to open their eyes and see reality. Their authority was already undermined. The humans had accomplished in 9 months what the council said was impossible. They had built an economy rivaling established powers. They had developed technology beyond council understanding. They had gained allies that the council was losing, all while the council sat debating their own superiority. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truth nobody wanted to acknowledge. Finally, Zelnthor spoke with resignation clear in his voice. He ordered an official request for negotiations to be drafted. The message would address humanity as a recognized sovereign power. It would propose a summit on neutral ground with terms determined by mutual agreement between equals. Ambassador Felcora asked quietly, what would happen if humanity refused the request? Zelnthor's answer was simple and defeated. Then they would learn to exist in a galaxy where humanity charted its own course without council involvement. And they would pray that humans proved more gracious in victory than the council had been in power. The summit was held aboard Gateway Station, a newly constructed facility in neutral space that had been built jointly by humans and the Silvery Consortium. The symbolism was clear to everyone who noticed it. This was not a council facility where humanity would be judged, nor was it a human station where the council would feel subordinate. It was something entirely new, representing a different kind of relationship between species who met as equals rather than as rulers and subjects. Admiral Jacob Harris walked through the pristine corridors with Metzelay, President Alan Foster at his side, both men taking in the architecture that blended human efficiency with alien beauty in ways that felt natural rather than forced. Behind them walked Lauren Mitchell, whose diplomatic skills had been crucial in arranging this summit on terms favorable to humanity. Commander Ryan Blake walked quietly at the back of their group, his presence a reminder that human military strength backed every word spoken in these negotiations. Lauren reported quietly that the council delegation had already arrived and was waiting in the main conference hall. High Arbiter Zelnthor had come personally, along with representatives from every major council species. Intelligence reports suggested that the Catholic ambassador looked like he had aged. A decade since the failed negotiations 9 months ago, his position within his own government had become precarious after humanity proved him spectacularly wrong about their ability to survive without council guidance. President Foster commented that the Catholic ambassador deserved whatever political consequences he faced for his arrogance. Jacob agreed, but cautioned that they were here to build bridges forward rather than punish past mistakes. Foster nodded, but his expression remained hard. The bridges they built would rest on foundations of genuine respect this time, not on false assumptions about human weakness. The main conference hall was arranged very differently from the chamber aboard Zenith Prime 9 months earlier. There was no hierarchical seating, no elevated platforms for those who considered themselves superior. Instead, the various delegations sat around a circular table that placed everyone at the same level. 3 smaller civilizations who had allied with humanity sat as observers, a pointed reminder that the Council no longer held absolute authority over galactic affairs. High Arbiter Zelnther stood as the human delegation entered, his crystalline form reflecting light and patterns that seemed less confident than before. He welcomed President Foster and Admiral Harris with words that carried genuine respect, rather than the condescension that had colored every interaction. 9 months ago, he extended the Council's gratitude for humanity's willingness to meet and discuss their future relationship. Alan Foster nodded acknowledgement, but remained standing, waiting for more. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Zelnathar clearly struggled with what came next. Finally, the High Arbiter spoke words that must have cost him dearly. 9 months ago, the Council had made decisions based on incomplete understanding of humanity and its capabilities. They had approached humans not as partners, but as subordinates who needed management. They had offered terms that were insulting rather than fair. They had been wrong. The admission hung in the air, and several council members shifted in their seats with obvious discomfort. Zelnther continued speaking about how humanity had demonstrated capabilities, exceeding all projections and challenging every assumption. They had proven that humans deserved not condescension but respect. The Council wished to begin again on terms of mutual equality and shared benefit. President Foster stood slowly, and his weathered face was thoughtful as he considered his response. He thanked Zelnthor for the admission and acknowledged that it came at considerable political cost. But before they proceeded any further, he needed to be completely clear about something that could not be left unsaid. Alan gestured to his delegation and spoke about how these people represented a species that had come to the first summit with open hands and genuine hope for friendship. Humanity had not been naive about galactic politics, but they had believed in the possibility of true partnership. What they received instead was arrogance wrapped in bureaucratic language and demands. Disguised as generous offers, he paused to let his words sink in before continuing. The Council had assumed that because humanity was new to the stars, they were somehow lesser. That because humans sought peace, they were weak. That because humans were different, they were inferior. Those assumptions had nearly cost humanity its sovereignty and its dignity. Alan's voice hardened slightly as he explained what those assumptions had taught humanity. They had learned that respect was not given freely in this galaxy, but had to be earned through demonstration of capability. That patience could be mistaken for weakness by those looking for submission. That sometimes the only way to be taken seriously was to stop asking for permission and start proving one's worth. Admiral Jacob Harris stood beside his president and added that the quantum drive, the rapid expansion, the economic independence were not plans humanity had been holding in reserve. They were desperate responses to rejection. Every scientist, engineer, and worker who contributed to human advancement did so, knowing they were proving humanity's value to a galaxy that had dismissed them. That kind of motivation was powerful beyond measure. Dr. Helen Carter spoke up from her position in the delegation. She explained that humans had accomplished in 9 months what should have required decades because the Council had told them it was impossible. In human psychology, there was a powerful drive to prove wrong anyone who placed limitations on human potential. The Council had not just challenged humanity, They had dared them, and humans never backed down from a dare. Commander. Ryan Blake pulled up holographic displays, showing human territory in the Allied systems that now looked to Earth for leadership rather than to the Council. He stated clearly that this was not about revenge or galactic domination. Humanity did not want to replace the Council or rule over other species. They wanted exactly what they had asked for 9 months ago: partnership, respect, and the freedom to chart their own course among the stars. President. Foster returned to his seat, and his posture relaxed slightly. He laid out what humanity was offering: a genuine treaty between equals with open trade, cultural exchange, mutual defense agreements, and collaborative scientific projects. Humanity would share some of their technological advances and expected to learn from Council knowledge in return. The Catholic ambassador questioned that word carefully. Some technology, but not all? His tone suggested suspicion about human motives. Jacob responded with a question of his own: would the Council share all of their technology with humanity? When the ambassador hesitated, Jacob made his point clear. Respect meant recognizing that all parties maintained sovereignty and protected their strategic interests. Humanity would share what made sense for mutual benefit while keeping what was necessary for their security. Exactly as the Council did. High Arbiter Zelenthor considered the human position carefully before responding. The terms were acceptable in principle, and the details would require extensive negotiation. But this time, they would negotiate as equals. No ultimatums, no demands, no assumption of superiority. They would discuss, compromise, and build something better together. Alan agreed, and the tension in the room eased noticeably. Over the following weeks, the summit evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. The rigid protocols that usually governed Council. Negotiations gave way to more flexible discussions, where ideas were debated on their merits rather than on the status of who proposed. Then Lieutenant Kate Morgan found herself in extended conversations with General Vothrock about military doctrine and defensive strategies. To her surprise, the discussions became genuinely friendly as both recognized professional competence in the other. Vothrak admitted that human approaches to warfare were fascinating in their combination of aggressive tactics and defensive strategy. Kate explained that humans fought with desperation, because survival was never guaranteed in human history. Dr. Helen Carter worked alongside Dr. Severin on quantum mechanics and found that combining their different approaches led to breakthroughs neither could achieve alone. The Council scientists' theoretical elegance merged with human practical innovation created new possibilities. Severin observed that humans thought in unconventional patterns that broke through limitations other species accepted as fundamental. Helen laughed and said humans called it thinking outside the box, refusing to let the box define what was possible. As the summit progressed, the treaty being drafted became more than just an agreement between humanity and the Council. It was becoming a blueprint for a more inclusive galactic community where newcomers were welcomed rather than subjugated, where innovation was celebrated rather than feared, where diversity was recognized as strength rather than treated as inferiority. On the final day of the summit, as the treaty signing ceremony approached, President Alan Foster stood with High Arbiter Zelenthor overlooking Gateway Station's observation deck. Stars stretched endlessly before them, representing infinite possibilities. Alan spoke quietly about the greatest irony of their situation. If the Council had offered genuine partnership 9 months ago, humanity probably would not have advanced so rapidly. The rejection had forced humans to reach deeper and push harder than they thought possible. Zelenthor asked if that meant the Council's mistake had accidentally benefited humanity. Alan admitted it had in some ways, but pointed out that it did not have to happen that way. They could have grown together, learned from each other, built trust gradually over time. Instead, the Council created an adversary from a potential ally, and both sides paid the price. Zelenthor, one final question with genuine curiosity. When humans walked away from the first summit, had they been certain of survival? Alan smiled and admitted they were absolutely terrified. But humanity had learned throughout its history that sometimes the bravest choice was walking away from a bad situation and betting on yourself instead. They gambled that human determination would see them through. And it had. At the signing ceremony, representatives from dozens of civilizations gathered to witness history. The treaty, officially titled the Gateway Accord, established humanity as a recognized sovereign power with full rights and responsibilities. It also included provisions for reforming council procedures to ensure future newcomers receive the respect that humanity had been denied. Admiral Jacob Harris gave humanity's official statement. 9 months ago, they had left negotiations disappointed but not defeated. Today they returned not as supplicants but as partners. This treaty represented more than human advancement. It represented the possibility of a better galactic community built on mutual respect rather than ancient hierarchies. He looked across the assembled delegates with pride. To those who doubted humanity, he offered thanks for teaching humans to believe in themselves more strongly. To those who supported them, gratitude for reminding them they were not alone. To everyone present, an invitation to build something worthy of the struggle it took to reach this moment, as delegates affixed their signatures to the treaty. Alalan leaned toward Ryan and wondered if it would last. Ryan watched as Zeln, Thor, and Foster shook hands in a gesture of mutual respect and replied that it had to last. The old way was broken beyond repair. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was not following behind anymore. They were helping lead the way forward into something better for everyone.